In the burning silence of the Arizona desert, a cowboy saved an Apache woman who opened her eyes and unknowingly stole his heart. Their worlds were enemies, but fate tied their souls overnight. What happened next changed both their destinies forever. For more powerful frontier love stories, like the video and subscribe to the channel. Let's get started. The desert evening in Arizona, 1887, carried a fierce stillness, the kind that made even a seasoned cowboy pause. Ethan Hayes had been riding for hours, guiding his horse along a dusty trail he knew by heart, when something unusual caught his eye. At first it looked like a bundle of cloth tossed by the wind, but instinct made him turn his horse toward it. As he drew closer, the shape took form, a human body lying motionless on the sand. Ethan's stomach tightened. People didn't simply fall unconscious in the desert and survive the night. He dismounted before the horse had fully stopped and rushed forward, boots digging into the hot dust. The closer he came, the clearer the details became. Torn Apache clothing, sunburned skin, dried blood on her hands, as if she had fought with her last breath. She was young, but it wasn't her age that struck him. It was the softness of her breathing, barely there, as if each breath required more strength than she had left. Ethan knelt beside her, his shadow shielding her from the last bite of sunlight. His first thought wasn't about danger or who she might belong to. Instead, it was the simple realization that she was alive, but only just. Ethan pressed his canteen to her lips, watching a drop of water touch her cracked mouth. Her throat moved weakly, swallowing. Relief washed through him. He knew the risks of helping her. Tensions between settlers and Apache bands ran high, and being found with her could bring trouble. But he didn't care. A life in danger was a life he couldn't walk away from. He lifted her carefully, feeling how light she was, as if starvation had hollowed her. Carrying her to his horse, he tied his supplies tighter, creating enough space to settle her securely against the saddle. Then, with a gentle but firm grip, he guided his horse toward his camp, hidden near a cluster of boulders. Every step felt urgent. Night would come fast, and cold desert nights could be as deadly as the heat. Ethan kept glancing at her face, making sure her faint breathing hadn't stopped. When he finally reached the camp, the sky was turning deep purple. He laid her on his bedroll, lit the fire, and warmed water to clean her wounds. Some were recent, slashes on her arms, a bruise on her ribs, but others looked older, signs of someone who had been running for days. He worked slowly, respectfully, not touching more than he needed. This wasn't simply treating injuries. This was returning dignity to a person who had nearly been left for dead. As the fire crackled, Ethan gave her more water drop by drop. Each swallow brought a flicker of life back into her face, but she remained unconscious, lost in some world between pain and survival. Ethan knew he couldn't sleep. He leaned against a rock, rifle beside him, eyes scanning the darkness. Coyotes roamed these parts. Bandits sometimes crossed the trails at night, and he couldn't ignore the thought that whoever had chased her might still be out there. Hours passed, the moon rose, the desert changed from burning gold to quiet blue. Ethan felt the weight of responsibility settle over him, a strange heaviness in his chest. He didn't know her name. He didn't know her story, but he felt an unexplainable pull to protect her, stronger than anything he'd felt in years. Ethan had lived alone for a long time, trusting only his horse and the trail. But tonight he found himself guarding a stranger with a loyalty he didn't understand. At times he saw her flinch in her sleep as if reliving something terrible, her fingers curled weakly, clutching the blanket he had placed around her. Ethan whispered softly. Words without meaning, meant only to soothe. Something about her presence stirred memories he'd tried to bury, the loss of people he once loved, the promise he made to never care too deeply again. But fate had ignored that promise. It had brought this girl into his path, and he couldn't shake the feeling that he was meant to find her. By the time dawn approached, Ethan's eyes were heavy, but he refused to rest. Light crept slowly over the canyon walls, brushing her face with soft warmth. That was when it happened. Her eyelashes fluttered. Ethan straightened instantly, heart pounding. For a moment, he wondered if he had imagined it, but then her eyes opened, dark, deep, searching in confusion. She blinked at the brightness, then at the unfamiliar camp, and finally at him. And in that single moment, Ethan felt something shift inside him, something he wasn't prepared for. She tried to sit up, but pain shot through her body. Ethan moved toward her but slowed himself, keeping his hands visible so she wouldn't feel threatened. He spoke gently, telling her she was safe, telling her he had found her unconscious. She didn't speak at first. Heras held caution, understandable given the history between their worlds. But there was something else, though. Quiet strength fighting its way back. Isin could see she was someone who had endured more than any person should. And yet she was alive and looking at him, and her lips finally parted, releasing a faint whisper. A name. Isin leaned in to hear it. Nia, she said. A simple word, but to him it sounded like the beginning of something far bigger. Nia glanced at the bandages on her arms, then at the fire, then back at him, studying the man who had chosen to save her. Ethan didn't know what she saw in his face, but he hoped she saw the truth. It meant her no harm. He only wanted to protect her until she could stand again. Ethan nodded slowly, introducing himself with a calm voice. He expected tension, mistrust, maybe even fear, but Nia's eyes softened unexpectedly as if she sensed the sincerity in his words. She whispered a quiet thank you, breathy, fragile, but real, and that simple gratitude hit Ethan harder than he expected. He felt something tighten in his chest, a feeling he hadn't allowed himself in years. He didn't know why her voice struck him so deeply. Maybe it was the strength beneath her weakness. Maybe it was the courage in her eyes. Or maybe, though he didn't dare admit it, fate had given him a reason to feel again. The morning light crept gently over the canyon ridge, touching Nia's face with a warmth that made her features soften. Ethan watched quietly, hardly breathing, as her eyes fluttered open. Dark, steady, carrying a silent fire that made his heart jolt. He had seen many faces in his life, some kind, some dangerous, some lost, but none had ever held him in place the way her gaze did in that first fragile moment. She blinked, trying to understand where she was, who he was, and why she was alive. Isin felt the heaviness of responsibility settle deeper in his chest. She tried to sit up and Ethan instinctively reached forward, steadying her before she could fall back. Pain flashed across her face, sharp and sudden, making her grip his arm with unexpected strength. Ethan spoke softly, assuring her she was safe, that no one would hurt her here. His voice felt different somehow, lower, calm, as if he didn't want to startle something delicate. He saw how her eyes searched the camp, piecing together what had happened. For the first time, she seemed aware of the bandages, the fire, and the man who had tended to her wounds. When she finally whispered her name, Nia, the sound settled into the quiet morning, like a thread stitching two worlds together. Isin repeated it softly, making sure he pronounced it right. The way her eyes softened, told him he had. She hesitated before revealing the truth about the ambush that had shattered her world. Her tribe had been attacked without warning. People she loved had scattered in all directions. She had run until her legs failed, until the desert claimed her last strength. Ethan listened without interrupting, feeling anger rise in him for the pain she had endured. He promised her quietly, but with a conviction that surprised even him, that she wouldn't have to run anymore. Nia looked at him with disbelief at first, as if the idea of safety was something she had forgotten existed, but the more she studied him, the more she seemed to see a truth she could trust. Isin had never been good with promises. Life on the frontier taught men to make as few as possible. But with her, the words came naturally. He meant them fully, and he knew they would change the direction of his life. Nia's breathing steadied, though her body remained tense, torn between fear and unfamiliar security. Ethan noticed every small detail, the way her fingers trembled, the slight hesitation in her voice, the strength she tried to hide. He felt a pull toward her that he didn't understand, a connection that went beyond responsibility or simple sympathy. Watching her struggle to stay brave despite everything broke something open inside him. He had always thought of himself as a hardened man shaped by the desert and loss. But now, sitting beside Nia, he felt vulnerable in a way he hadn't felt in years. She studied him, though, not with suspicion, but with a quiet curiosity. Ethan could sense her weighing the truth of his actions, trying to reconcile his kindness with the stories she'd heard about men like him. When their eyes met, something unspoken passed between them. It wasn't trust yet, but it was the beginning of something close. Isin saw a woman who, despite her pain, carried strength deeper than any wound. And Nia saw a man who had risked his own peace to protect her through the night. That recognition alone tied their fates tighter than either of them realized. Isin poured her a small cup of water, helping her drink without straining her injuries. As she drank, her fingers brushed his accidentally, and a rush of heat traveled through him. It startled him. He had never been afraid of bullets, storms, or wild horses, but this feeling was different. It felt dangerous in a way he wasn't prepared for. A part of him wanted to pull back, but another part, stronger and deeper, wanted to move closer. Nia didn't notice the battle inside him, but she did notice the gentleness in his touch. The morning grew brighter, but the space between them felt wrapped in a quiet bubble, untouched by the harsh world beyond. Isin felt his thoughts spiraling in directions he had never allowed himself to explore. He wondered about her past, her future, what she dreamed of, what she feared. And somewhere inside those questions was a frightening realization. He didn't want to lose her. He didn't even know why yet. Maybe it was her courage. Maybe it was her eyes. Maybe it was simply fate. But whatever it was, it had taken root in him overnight, unstoppable and real. Nia looked at him with an expression he couldn't quite interpret. Gratitude mixed with uncertainty and something faintly hopeful underneath. She whispered another soft thank you, this one deeper, more meaningful. Isin felt his heart clench at the sound. He didn't understand how or why, but he knew something inside him had shifted permanently the moment she opened her eyes. She had become important without warning, without permission. And he sensed that protecting her wasn't just a choice anymore. It was a calling carved into his soul. The desert had pulled their paths together by accident, but destiny rarely worked by accident. As the wind carried the scent of morning sage through the canyon, Ethan felt the weight of what their meeting meant. He didn't know what dangers were coming or what challenges waited on the horizon. But he knew one truth with absolute certainty. His life had changed the moment she woke. And Nia, weakened yet unbroken, seemed to understand that her life had changed, too. Two strangers bound by survival now stood at the edge of a story bigger than either of them could imagine.